what is up YouTube? Today I'm riding the 2023 Indian Scout. And that's it, that's the name. Usually I have these big long names for bikes. So this is one of Indian's sporty cruisers. And I say sporty because it looks sporty. It's got a good amount of power, so nice and nimble and smooth. So we're taking it for a ride today. Last time I rode this bike was 2016, I believe. It doesn't look all that different than what it used to look like. So I'm wondering if there's gonna be anything else different. Now, when I rode the first Scout back in 2016, I was very surprised at the power. The power was really good for a cruiser bike, in my opinion. This bike does have 100 horsepower and about 75 foot-pounds of torque. That's a pretty good amount for a smaller bike like this. I just rode the Indian Sport Chief and that was pretty fun. Quite a bit of power on that bike. So this bike already doesn't feel like it has the same amount of power, and it doesn't on paper. And it's very well mannered at low speeds. The on and off the throttle is very smooth. It feels nice and composed at lower speeds here. Now initially I feel like this bike is more sporty because it doesn't feel like the Chief. It doesn't give you that old style cruiser feel as much as the Chief did. This is, if you know Harleys, this is going to be like the Sportster S, more sporty cruiser type feel. And it is very quiet as well. This bike does not have really any technology to it. So we get a gear indicator, a clock, an odometer. That's pretty much it. Some of the models have ABS, but that's pretty much the only technology you're gonna get in this bike. And there's not much else to it, so it is pretty bare bones in terms of what you get. Downshifting gives you a nice solid clunk. So on cruiser bikes, I do like the clunk. It does kind of fit the mood of the bike. Taking off from a stop is very easy. Because the throttle's so smooth, you don't give it too much throttle. Nice and easy to let out the clutch as well, find the friction zone. There's a little bit of vibrations in the handles, but it is definitely smoother than the Chief. And if we're comparing this to a Harley Nightster, and the Nightster feels a little bit more cruiser-like than this bike feels a little bit more of a sporty cruiser. I am getting a little bit of cruiser vibes from it though. It's got some nice V-twin vibrations. It does have a deep rumble to it, but it doesn't sound as burly as I would like it to sound. And when you roll into the throttle, you do get some good power. Very smooth acceleration. So it kind of has to build up a little bit, roll on the throttle, whereas the Chief had kind of an instant power, and the Nightster is more instant power. And this one doesn't have drive modes. You pretty much just get one standard mode. So it's always gonna kind of ride the same way. So this bike starts at $13,249, and that's without ABS. And then it just goes up from there. A fairly expensive bike. I guess for what you get, it is pretty pricey. The seating position is pretty upright here. I do feel like I can relax my arms. So I feel like I'm sitting straight up. There's no windshield on this bike. And you can see my knees are pretty bent here. I'm 5'11". So fairly low seat height, and this is a smaller bike anyway. But you see the foot controls are very forward. So you do have to put your foot all the way up here and all the way up there to reach the foot controls. So it is more of a clamshell position. The Chief wasn't as much of a clamshell as this one. But yeah, clutch is easy to work here. Give it a little bit of gas. Very forgiving. Doesn't feel like it's gonna stall. I went over a hard bump there and it gave me a little bit of jarring, but honestly it did soak up quite a bit of that bump there. So that was nice surprise. So I feel like you do have to roll on the throttle to really get the horsepower out of here. So I'm kind of working third gear here, and it does have a good amount of power. I don't think it's gonna blow you away, especially after getting right off the Chief Sport. And I feel like the Nightster had quite a bit more torque pull than this, but maybe this power band is a little bit more balanced. I feel like you could get power from almost anywhere in the RPM range, whereas the Chief had a very specific power band. I don't feel like it wants to go left or right all the time, so it is pretty easy to keep in a straight line. I don't want to say it feels heavy. It actually feels lighter than some of the bigger cruiser bikes for sure, but it feels stable and solid going down the street, so it doesn't feel too light. The seat is pretty nice here. It's got a big cup in the back, so it really keeps you from rolling off the back there, and it's fairly comfortable actually. I like the way it's shaped, and it's holding me in place pretty well. Here's another bump. Yeah, it's got a little bit of suspension in the back. See, it's still pretty quick. It just doesn't have that same torque pull that some of the other cruisers do. Let's go to 6th gear here. You still feel some vibrations in the handlebars. Maybe you like the vibrations. Maybe it makes the bike feel more classic and retro than it actually is. Gives you that retro feel. When you get off the bike, your fingers and your hands are tingling. It's not my favorite feeling. But yeah, this bike is very easy to ride. I mean, it doesn't take much. It's very smooth. It clunks into gear nicely. The clutch is very easy to pull and let out. This throttle is very smooth. I wouldn't say this is a beginner bike necessarily. It still does have a lot of power even though it's more reserved, but I think a Scout 60 would be a little bit better of a beginner bike, and cheaper too. Let's go 2nd gear for this. Nice turn there. Nice and easy. Yeah, it feels very easy to lean over. I feel confident leaning this bike over. And it does have some good clearance too. So you can lean this bike pretty good. It feels very flickable and easy to lean over. It's very relaxed just cruising here at speeds, 45 miles an hour. Very relaxed. And very easy to control at low speeds too. Because it's a smaller, lighter bike, it does feel easier to handle at low speeds coming to a stop. Actually, it does sound pretty good. It's got a good sound to it. When you're riding it, it's pretty quiet. When you rev it up, it does give you a little bit of a rumble there. The brakes feel pretty good too. They're not too touchy. Although there's not a lot of brake lever movement for the front brakes here. So going through this traffic circle here, lean it over. Yeah, it handles really well. So it's got some good power. It doesn't give you that insane torque pull that some of the other bikes though. So it's very kind of smooth, roll on the throttle power. But I feel like I can lean it over very easily and handle it very easily still. But just rolling on the throttle in 4th gear, I feel like it does have a good amount of power still. It seems like a very balanced power band. It's not too peaky. It seems very smooth power band. But yeah, good amount of power for sure. In a small bike like this, it still pulls pretty well. Got more than enough power for the city and the highways. There's a good amount of brake dive in the front, suspension dive, when like the front is pretty soft here. You can see it cycling. The back's a little bit soft, but not too bad. Alright, rolling on the throttle here, getting into high RPMs. And then 4th gear here. Yeah, it's got some pull. I kind of like 4th gear here. It's kind of the sweet spot for power. You roll on the throttle a bit and you got some good power. But then we'll go to 6th gear and see if it smooths out a bit. Yeah, I mean, it definitely smoothed out a bit. There's still some vibrations in the handlebars and the foot pegs, but not as bad as you would expect, I think. We're going just over 60. There is a good amount of wind blast on here, so that's something to consider. This isn't going to be a touring bike necessarily. You could take it on long trips, but the wind is going to get tiring after a while. Now I feel like I'm getting pushed around a little bit by the wind, but overall it's fairly stable. 6th gear roll on. Oh yeah, I mean, it's got some power still, so it'll pick up speed pretty quickly. Rev matching is pretty easy. It revs up pretty quickly. Not that you really need to rev match. I think engine braking would be better here. Overall, just a really easy bike to ride. It's very smooth with the throttle. Gear shifting is easy, and it's got a nice even power band, so it gives you power almost everywhere. And it's not too torquey where you're just surprised by the power. It's very predictable power. I think that makes it a great just all-around bike. I don't know, it's got a little bit of a cruiser feel to it still. It doesn't feel like a full-on retro cruiser, but it does give you a little bit of a cruiser feel with some good modern power and handling characteristics. 13,200 starting MSRP is pretty high. You don't really get a ton of electronics with it, so you don't get a ton of technology. I mean, not that you need technology on a bike, but for this price I would expect a little bit more technology included. In terms of the bike and how it rides, very nice bike, very fun to ride. Yeah, I mean, I would say go check out the Harley Nightster to compare. That's gonna have quite a bit more technology than this bike.